Hello there. Tonight I'm taking you back to the dawn of modern invention. Imagine waking up one day to discover that the items you rely on daily, your smartphone, your printed books, even the money in your wallet, simply vanished. Sounds terrifying, right? But here's the fascinating truth. Many of the everyday things we depend on actually originated thousands of years ago in a civilization that was astonishingly advanced for its time. Welcome to the incredible world of ancient China. Ancient China wasn't just another civilization lost to time. It was a powerhouse of innovation, ingenuity, and ideas that changed the course of human history. Long before our modern conveniences, the Chinese were pioneering breakthroughs in technology, communication, warfare, economics, and much more. In this video, we're not just covering the well-known inventions. We're diving deep into surprising creations that you might never have associated with ancient China. Inventions that shaped our history and our modern lives in profound ways. So buckle up, because you're about to discover how the ancient Chinese set humanity on a trajectory toward our modern age. If you enjoyed tonight's story, I'd really appreciate it if you could give it a like, subscribe, or maybe comment on where you are listening from. Now sit back, relax, close your eyes, and we will begin our journey. Let's begin with a simple yet groundbreaking invention, the invention of paper. It's easy to underestimate paper. We scribble grocery lists on it, print books, and even make airplanes out of it without a second thought. But what if I told you that before paper, the most popular writing surfaces were clay tablets, bones, bamboo strips, and even silk? Imagine trying to write your reminder list on a scroll of bamboo, or carry around a 10-pound clay notepad. Not exactly ideal. This is where Cai Lun enters the story. A Chinese court official during the Eastern Han Dynasty, around 105 CE. Cai Lun is widely credited with inventing a method of paper making that would revolutionize the world. The truth is, early forms of paper existed before his time, but he refined and standardized the process to such an extent that he became associated with its creation. Cai Lun's innovation wasn't merely about creating something new. It was about transforming waste into wonder. He used mulberry bark, old rags, worn fishing nets, and hemp fibers, materials that would otherwise be discarded. These were mashed into a pulp, suspended in water, and then strained through a flat screen to form thin sheets. Once dried, the result was a light, flexible, durable material we now call paper. And as a bonus, it was recycled. And while that process may sound basic, its implications were anything but. Consider this. At the time of Cai Lun's invention, the Roman Empire still relied heavily on parchment and papyrus, materials that were costly, less durable, and far less suited to mass production. Cai Lun's paper was cheap, practical, and could be made from recycled materials. Paper's introduction sparked a cascade of transformation across Chinese society. For administrators, it was a dream come true. Record-keeping became easier, communication between distant provinces improved, and bureaucratic efficiency soared. For scholars, paper opened up new avenues for education and creativity. It was no longer necessary to engrave characters into bamboo or carve them into stone. Ideas could now flow freely from brush to page. Religious texts like the Tao Te Ching and Buddhist sutras could now be copied and shared more widely. And that access to sacred and philosophical thought contributed to a blossoming of literacy, spirituality, and cultural sophistication. The arts flourished as well. With the availability of paper, calligraphy evolved from a practical tool into a revered form of artistic expression. Painters, too, found paper a medium that was light, portable, and perfectly suited to capturing the grace of ink or brush. But perhaps the most astonishing part of this story is how long China managed to keep paper-making a secret. For nearly 600 years, the Chinese monopolized the art of paper production. It was considered a state asset, a tool of imperial advantage. Revealing its secrets to outsiders was an act of treason punishable by death. It wasn't until the 8th century that the process began to leak out, literally and figuratively. In 751 CE, during the Battle of Talas, Chinese soldiers were captured by Arab forces. Among them were skilled papermakers who were persuaded or forced to share their craft. From there, papermaking spread across the Islamic world to places like Samarkand, Baghdad, and eventually Cairo. By the 12th century, it reached Spain, and from there the rest of Europe. This was no mere cultural curiosity. It was a revolution. Without paper, there would be no Gutenberg press, no widespread literacy, no modern education system. Paper allowed for the preservation and dissemination of ideas in a way no previous medium could match. Let's pause for a moment and appreciate that. One man's innovation, born of necessity, waste, and wisdom, made it possible for billions of people over centuries to learn, to imagine, and to develop. The economic implications were just as profound. Paper became the foundation of contracts, currency, and commerce. It allowed businesses to maintain ledgers, kings to issue proclamations, and ordinary citizens to communicate across long distances. When paper money was eventually introduced during the Tang and Song dynasties, it changed the very nature of economic exchange, enabling trade to flourish across enormous regions. And the process itself, though improved and mechanized over time, remains strikingly similar to what Kai Lun envisioned. Modern papermaking still involves breaking down fibrous material into pulp, spreading it into thin layers, pressing and drying. The machines are faster, the inputs more diverse, but the core principle is basically the same. Imagine the ripple effect. Education became more accessible. Stories could be written and rewritten. Scientists could record their observations. Poets could share their hearts with the world. Historians could preserve the memory of empires. Paper became a mirror in which humanity saw and recorded itself. Of course, the journey of paper wasn't without struggle. In Europe, paper was initially resisted. Scribes and parchment makers feared for their livelihoods. Some religious institutions even viewed it as a threat, believing that sacred texts should only be written on animal skins. But the utility and affordability of paper were impossible to ignore, and soon it became indispensable. Today, we produce over 400 million metric tons of paper each year. From cardboard packaging to sticky notes, from election ballots to passports, paper touches nearly every aspect of our lives. And all of that began nearly 2,000 years ago, in a quiet corner of Imperial China, when a court official decided to turn trash into treasure. So next time you scribble a note or print a document, take a moment to reflect. That simple act connects you with a story stretching back through centuries, across continents, through empires risen and fallen. It's the story of ingenuity, of preservation, and of power, the power of paper. Next, we have an invention born not out of intention, but accident, an explosive substance that dazzled and destroyed. Imagine a group of ancient Chinese alchemists, working by torchlight deep in the imperial laboratories of the Tang dynasty, somewhere in the 9th century. They weren't looking to build weapons or conquer kingdoms. In fact, their goal was immortality. That's right. These alchemists were on a divine mission to find the elixir of eternal life. But what they discovered instead was something far more volatile, an explosive mixture of sulfur, charcoal, and saltpeter. The result? Gunpowder, the accidental invention that would go on to transform warfare, political power, and even entertainment across the globe. The earliest mention of gunpowder comes from Taoist texts dating back to the 800s, which describe experiments involving these ingredients that would suddenly erupt into flame. These records actually include warnings about the dangers of mixing sulfur and saltpeter, sometimes describing explosions that burned down entire laboratories. It wasn't long before word spread among scholars, monks, and military minds that this fiery substance could be used for more than just alchemy. Initially dubbed huo yao, meaning fire drug, gunpowder quickly evolved beyond its mystical roots. Early applications were surprisingly tame. Gunpowder was used in rudimentary fireworks for religious ceremonies, festivals, and imperial displays meant to frighten evil spirits. The brilliant sparks, loud bangs, and trails of smoke were awe-inspiring to behold and were thought to be manifestations of celestial power. But humans being humans, it didn't take long before the destructive potential of this substance was realized. By the Song dynasty, around the year 900, military engineers were already experimenting with gunpowder as a weapon. They created fire arrows, essentially arrows with small tubes of gunpowder attached, that would ignite mid-flight, terrifying enemies and setting flammable materials ablaze. These innovations quickly escalated. The Chinese developed gunpowder bombs, thrown by hand or launched from catapults. They invented the earliest versions of landmines and naval mines. Flame-spitting tubes, known as fire lances, combined gunpowder with spears to unleash terrifying bursts of fire in close combat. These devices laid the foundation for the first gun-like weapons. And then came the real game-changer, the cannon. By the late 13th century, Chinese armies were deploying explosive shells and proto-cannons on the battlefield. While rudimentary by modern standards, these early weapons gave Chinese forces a psychological and tactical advantage. Fortresses that once withstood siege for months could now be brought down in days. The military potential of gunpowder was so great that it triggered a race for development and deployment. Knowledge of gunpowder spread through diplomatic missions, warfare, and trade. The Mongols, during their conquests, played a critical role in carrying this technology across Asia and into the Middle East and Europe. By the 14th century, gunpowder weapons were appearing on European battlefields, and the face of global conflict would never be the same. What's remarkable is how this one accidental discovery, a misstep on the road to immortality, could so fundamentally alter the course of human history. Warfare transformed from close-range melee combat to distant, devastating firepower. Kingdoms rose and fell on the strength of their gunpowder arsenals. Castles, once impregnable, became obsolete. Naval warfare was revolutionized, empires expanded, and military strategy was rewritten from the ground up. But gunpowder wasn't just about destruction. It also sparked innovation in chemistry, metallurgy, and engineering. The need to safely store, transport, and deploy explosive materials led to advancements in container design, fuse technology, and ignition systems. These technologies would eventually influence mining, construction, and manufacturing in ways that extended far beyond the battlefield. And then there's the cultural side. Even after gunpowder found its grim role in warfare, its more festive applications never went away. Fireworks remained a central part of Chinese celebrations and were eventually exported to the rest of the world. Today, every New Year's celebration, 4th of July, and Olympic opening ceremony owes a debt to ancient Chinese alchemy. Still, we can't ignore the duality of gunpowder's legacy. It brought people together in celebration, but also tore civilizations apart in conflict. It gave rise to powerful empires and, just as swiftly, enabled their downfall. It was a symbol of both creative brilliance and human destructiveness. In an ironic twist, the very substance created in pursuit of eternal life has arguably caused more death and transformation than any other invention in human history. But perhaps that's the real lesson here, that the pursuit of greatness, whether through science, magic, or invention, often leads to unexpected world-altering consequences. So the next time you watch fireworks light up the sky, think about those ancient Chinese alchemists. Think about how their quest to conquer death gave the world one of its most powerful tools for both destruction and celebration. And now, we'll explore how a simple rock, lodestone, would help ancient Chinese travelers find their way across vast seas, reshaping the course of global exploration forever. Imagine standing on the deck of a wooden ship in ancient times, surrounded by an endless foggy sea. No GPS, no digital maps, just the waves, the stars, and your instincts. For early sailors and explorers, venturing far from familiar shores meant risking everything, until, that is, a small, mysterious rock gave humanity a reliable sense of direction, the magnetic compass. And like so many transformative inventions, it began in ancient China. The earliest version of the compass appeared during the Han Dynasty, around the 2nd century BCE, and it wasn't even used for navigation. Instead, this early compass was made from lodestone, a naturally magnetized mineral of iron. These curious stones, when suspended or floated, would always align themselves north-south. Somehow the ancient Chinese noticed this peculiar behavior and initially used lodestone for spiritual practices like feng shui, not seafaring. Feng shui practitioners believed that the alignment of a structure in harmony with the Earth's magnetic field could influence prosperity, health, and balance. These magnetic tools were called south-pointing spoons and were typically mounted on bronze plates. The spoon-shaped device would spin and then settle, always pointing south. The symbolism was profound. To face south was to face life, vitality, and the emperor himself. In a society where orientation carried both spiritual and social meaning, this was more than science. It was a gateway to cosmic order. But as Chinese understanding of magnetism deepened, so did their curiosity about practical uses. By the Song Dynasty, 960 to 1279 CE, the compass had evolved into a pivotal maritime tool. Sailors began using a magnetized needle that floated in water or was mounted on a fixed card, allowing them to navigate even on cloudy days or starless nights. This innovation marked a revolution in human mobility. Before this, sailors relied on landmarks, wind patterns, or celestial navigation, methods that were only reliable under perfect conditions. The magnetic compass, by contrast, offered consistency. It provided explorers and traders with the confidence to venture further, for longer, and under previously impossible circumstances. And venture they did. Chinese merchants, using compass-guided ships, traversed the treacherous waters of the South China Sea, reached the coasts of Southeast Asia, India, and beyond. The compass became a silent navigator that empowered vast maritime trade routes, setting the stage for global economic exchange centuries before the age of exploration officially began in Europe. But as with paper and gunpowder, the compass didn't remain a Chinese secret forever. Through trade and conquest, the magnetic compass eventually made its way west. Arab traders brought it to the Islamic world, and from there it reached Europe by the 12th century. This simple tool would go on to become indispensable to explorers like Vasco da Gama and Christopher Columbus, ushering in an era of transoceanic exploration and empire building. What's fascinating is how different early compasses looked from the sleek, circular devices we recognize today. The Chinese versions often resembled abstract art, carefully carved spoons of lodestone spinning on bronze plates etched with cardinal points and cosmological symbols. Later versions featured needles floating on water or suspended from silk threads. This wasn't just a navigation device. It was a scientific, philosophical, and artistic object rolled into one. It embodied the Chinese worldview, that nature's patterns could be understood and harmonized with, that humanity could align itself with the cosmos to find both direction and destiny. And the philosophical depth didn't stop there. Taoist scholars saw the compass as an expression of yin and yang, the balance between polarity and motion. The needle's quiet rotation spoke of unseen forces, guiding both ships and souls. The military also benefited from the compass. Troop movements could now be better coordinated. Maps became more accurate. Fortifications could be oriented more strategically. Whether in peacetime commerce or wartime strategy, the magnetic compass offered clarity in a chaotic world. But the true brilliance of the compass isn't just its magnetism. It's what it symbolizes. The human desire to explore, to understand, to find one's place in a vast and often bewildering world. The compass didn't just help ships find land. It helped humanity find itself. Imagine a merchant sailor aboard a Song Dynasty junk ship, his cargo filled with silks, ceramics, and spices. He navigates through storms and darkness, not with fear, but with purpose, because a tiny magnetic needle gives him a silent promise. You are not lost. Keep going. There is direction. Today, the compass remains a symbol of guidance and perseverance. We use it metaphorically to speak of moral compasses, of finding direction in our lives. But that metaphor was made possible because the ancient Chinese chose not to ignore a curious rock that pointed south. They studied it, refined it, and turned it into an invention that reshaped the world. So next time you open a map app or set a course on your car's GPS, remember that it all began with a rock on a bronze plate in ancient China. The compass didn't just help us find new worlds. It helped us believe they were out there waiting to be found. Now, let's imagine a world where the written word exists, but each book must be copied by hand, laboriously, painstakingly. One mistake and the whole page must be redone. For centuries, that's how knowledge was passed down. Handwritten manuscripts, one at a time. But in ancient China, that changed. Long before Europe had even imagined the printing press, Chinese inventors were already revolutionizing how people shared ideas. This is the story of how China gave humanity one of its most powerful tools: printing. The roots of printing stretch back to the Tang Dynasty in the 7th century CE, with the development of woodblock printing. It was elegant in its simplicity. A craftsman would carve an entire page of text into a wooden block, coat it with ink, and press it onto sheets of paper. For the first time in history, it was possible to reproduce documents with speed and consistency. Books, prayers, artwork, they could now be shared widely, breaking the monopoly of knowledge previously held by the elite. The Diamond Sutra, printed in 868 CE, is the oldest known printed book in existence, and it came from China. Think about that for a moment. Nearly 600 years before Gutenberg, Chinese artisans had already mastered the process of mass-producing texts. The printing revolution had begun, not in Europe, but in Asia. Initially, woodblock printing was used primarily for religious texts. Buddhist monks saw its potential to spread the teachings of Buddha across the land. Suddenly, ordinary people could own a prayer book, read scriptures, and connect to spiritual teachings without needing to visit a temple. Literacy began to spread, not just among the aristocracy, but among commoners too. The implications were profound. Education flourished. Art took on new dimensions. Images and illustrations could be printed and distributed, leading to the rise of visual storytelling and printed art. And governments found new ways to communicate with the public. Decrees, laws, even public health instructions were printed and displayed in towns across the empire. Yet even this massive leap was only the beginning. Enter Bi Sheng, a humble artisan living during the Northern Song dynasty in the 11th century. Bi Sheng wasn't satisfied with woodblocks, which were cumbersome and had to be entirely reproduced for every new page. Around 1040 CE, he developed something revolutionary: movable type. Instead of carving an entire page into wood, Bi Sheng created individual characters out of baked clay. Each piece represented one Chinese character, and these could be arranged and rearranged to form any text. Imagine the difference this made. Books could be printed more quickly. Corrections were easier. Custom orders could be fulfilled without carving a whole new block. Movable type was, in essence, the first version of what we now know as typesetting, a precursor to the mechanical presses that would later dominate Europe. And yet, Bi Sheng's brilliance remained largely confined to China and Korea for centuries. Why didn't it spread? Ironically, the same complexity that made the Chinese written language rich and expressive also made movable type extremely challenging. With thousands of unique characters, managing and organizing them was labor-intensive. In contrast, European languages use far fewer symbols, making Gutenberg's alphabetic movable type more practical for mass adoption in the West. Still, the achievement stands. Bi Sheng invented movable type 4 centuries before Gutenberg, and while it may not have transformed China in quite the same way it did Europe, its legacy is undeniable. Printing in China continued to evolve. By the Yuan and Ming dynasties, wooden and later metal movable type became more common, and print culture flourished. Encyclopedias, agricultural manuals, novels. Knowledge flowed through printed pages at a scale previously unimaginable. And let's not forget the cultural impact. The printing revolution helped shape the Chinese literary tradition. Works like Romance of the Three Kingdoms and Journey to the West were reproduced and distributed widely, becoming household stories and cultural touchstones. Ordinary citizens gained access to stories, poetry, and ideas once reserved for scholars. The influence of Chinese printing extended beyond its borders. Korea adopted and enhanced movable type, producing metal types before Gutenberg's invention. Japan, too, embraced woodblock printing and used it extensively to produce everything from religious scrolls to erotic art. When the technology finally reached Europe, it sparked a revolution. The printing press became a catalyst for the Renaissance, the Protestant Reformation, and the scientific revolution. It democratized information, weakened the grip of religious authorities, and allowed revolutionary ideas to spread like wildfire. But it all began in ancient China, with a woodblock and an idea. Printing didn't just preserve knowledge, it amplified it. It didn't just replicate ideas, it set them free. And now we discuss possibly one of the more widely known marvels of ancient China, When we think of the Great Wall of China, we often picture an unbroken line of stone meandering over mountaintops, a colossal symbol of ancient might. But the truth is, this architectural marvel wasn't built in one go, nor was it a singular structure. It evolved over centuries and dynasties, each section reflecting a different time, purpose, and technique. Behind its sheer length, over 13,000 miles, is a story not just of defense, but of astonishing engineering innovation, grit, and genius. The earliest sections of what we now call the Great Wall began as earthen ramparts and packed soil embankments, constructed during the Warring States period, 475 to 221 BCE. These rudimentary walls were built by individual kingdoms like Qin, Zhao, and Yan to protect their borders from nomadic invasions. When Qin Shi Huang unified China in 221 BCE, he ordered many of these existing fortifications to be connected, creating the first version of the Great Wall as a unified defensive structure. Now, consider the logistics. This was an era without cranes, bulldozers, or concrete mixers. The terrain was unforgiving. Mountains, deserts, rivers. Transporting building materials alone was a feat. So how did they do it? The answer lies in one of the wall's most underrated secrets: adaptability. In the early phases, especially in the western regions, the wall was made using tamped earth. Workers would construct wooden frames, fill them with dirt, gravel, and twigs, and then use tools to compress the contents layer by layer. The result? Massive walls that were incredibly resilient. Some of these earthen segments have stood for over 2 millennia. Later, during the Ming Dynasty, as military threats from the Mongols intensified, the wall underwent its most famous transformation. Stone and bricks replaced earth and reeds. Ming engineers developed advanced kiln techniques to mass-produce bricks with remarkable uniformity and strength. These bricks were lighter and easier to transport than large stones, yet just as durable. Workers constructed long stretches of wall by interlocking these bricks with lime mortar, often mixed with glutinous rice flour. Yes, rice. This glutinous rice mortar, sometimes called sticky rice mortar, is one of the most ingenious aspects of the wall's construction. It combined lime with cooked rice to produce a binder that was not only strong, but also highly resistant to water. Modern chemical analysis has shown that this mixture had incredible durability, giving the Ming Wall its famed longevity. In fact, parts of the wall built with this rice mortar have survived earthquakes that leveled modern buildings. But the wall wasn't just a physical barrier, it was a communication system. The Ming Dynasty developed a vast network of signal towers positioned at regular intervals. These towers allowed soldiers to send messages using smoke signals, fire beacons, flags, drums, and lanterns. During the day, smoke. At night, fire. Each combination of signals conveyed specific messages, such as the size of an approaching force or its direction. With this system, alerts could travel hundreds of miles in mere hours. To support the thousands of soldiers stationed along its length, the wall included garrison posts, barracks, and storage facilities. Some of the larger watchtowers functioned as command centers. Ingeniously, many of these outposts were placed near water sources and arable land to ensure self-sufficiency. Pathways atop the wall were wide enough for troops and even carts, allowing for swift troop movement and supply transport along the battlements. It's important to understand the wall wasn't continuous in the way we imagine today. It was more like a network, a strategic barrier system. Certain gaps were intentional, designed to funnel invaders into difficult terrain or bottlenecks where they could be easily overwhelmed. The workforce behind the Great Wall was immense and diverse. Soldiers, peasants, convicts, and forced laborers all contributed. Conditions were harsh, and fatalities were common. Some estimates suggest that hundreds of thousands died during its construction. Many were buried near the wall itself, giving rise to the grim nickname, the longest cemetery on earth. Yet despite the human cost, the wall was an unparalleled achievement. It not only defended the empire's northern frontier, but also became a potent symbol of national unity, resilience, and ingenuity. The wall represented the emperor's power, the state's reach, and the enduring strength of Chinese civilization. Even today, engineers and architects marvel at the wall's precision. The bricks used during the Ming-era bear stamps that identify their kiln of origin, much like modern barcodes. These quality control measures ensured accountability and standardization, astonishing for a project of this scale in pre-industrial times. The legacy of the Great Wall endures not just in its stone and brick, but in the ideas it inspired: perseverance, adaptability, and innovation. It wasn't just about keeping enemies out. It was about proving what humans can accomplish when challenged by nature, time, and threat. Today, the Great Wall stands as a testament not only to ancient Chinese engineering, but also to a civilization that understood how to turn necessity into brilliance. It tells a story not of isolation, but of foresight and coordination on a scale rarely seen before or since. So next time you see a picture of the Great Wall snaking across misty hills, remember, you're looking at the result of centuries of ingenuity, sacrifice, and architectural genius. It's not just a wall, it's a wonder. Next up, we imagine living in an age where people had no real way to predict natural disasters. Earthquakes would strike without warning, causing chaos, panic, and destruction. People often interpreted these devastating tremors as signs of angry gods or omens of political upheaval. But in ancient China, during the Han Dynasty, one man refused to accept earthquakes as purely mystical events. His name was Zhang Heng, and in 132 CE, he built a device so advanced that even modern scientists remain astounded. That device was the world's first seismograph. Zhang Heng was not just an inventor. He was a polymath, an astronomer, mathematician, engineer, and poet. His quest wasn't just to detect earthquakes, but to understand them. And to do that, he needed a machine that could register something invisible: seismic vibrations. The seismograph he created was a large bronze vessel, resembling a wine urn or a cauldron, nearly 6 feet in diameter. Around the sides of this vessel, he arranged 8 dragon heads, each one representing a cardinal or intercardinal direction. Directly beneath each dragon's mouth sat a small bronze toad, mouth agape, waiting. Now here's where it gets fascinating. Inside the vessel was a pendulum or inverted pendulum system, extremely sensitive to ground movements. When seismic waves reached the device, the pendulum would shift ever so slightly, triggering a mechanism that caused one of the dragon's mouths to open. Out would fall a bronze ball, straight into the mouth of the toad below. By identifying which dragon released its ball, observers could determine the direction from which the earthquake had originated. This mechanism was astonishingly accurate. Ancient records claim that the device once registered an earthquake hundreds of miles away. Officials at the time were skeptical because no tremors were felt in the capital. But days later, a messenger arrived confirming the quake. Zhang Heng's invention had worked flawlessly. Modern reconstructions of his device suggest it functioned through a delicately balanced internal pendulum and system of levers. When ground motion occurred, It nudged the pendulum just enough to activate the release mechanism. While we may not know the exact design, because Zhang Heng's blueprints have been lost to history, scientists and engineers have recreated functional models that mimic the described behavior, proving that such a feat was entirely possible with the technology of the time. But why is this important? Because Zhang Heng's seismograph marks the beginning of a scientific approach to understanding natural phenomena. Rather than relying solely on myth or superstition, Zhang sought empirical evidence and mechanical methods to analyze the natural world. It was an early form of seismology, centuries before the West developed similar instruments. His invention wasn't just a marvel of engineering, it had real-world impact. In an empire as vast and diverse as Han China, knowing where an earthquake had occurred was crucial for mobilizing disaster relief. Roads could be cleared, supplies sent, and aid dispatched, faster and more effectively. It was disaster management, ancient style. Equally impressive is how Zhang's work influenced thinking. His seismograph wasn't isolated from his other pursuits. He also designed water clocks, hydraulic-powered armillary spheres to model celestial movements, and wrote extensively on cosmology. He believed the Earth was suspended in space, not supported by mythical creatures, and he even proposed that lunar eclipses were caused by the moon blocking sunlight, centuries ahead of his time. Zhang Heng's legacy is a reminder of how curiosity and observation can lead to revolutionary discoveries. His seismograph is often compared to modern earthquake sensors, not because it matched today's precision, but because it introduced the fundamental principle that machines could detect and measure the invisible forces of nature. And culturally, the device left a mark too. Chinese poetry and literature reference the mythical dragons and toads of Zhang's seismograph as metaphors for vigilance and balance. In museums today, replicas of the device stand as both scientific and artistic marvels. Let's not overlook how difficult it is to develop a machine so finely tuned to motion. Consider the delicacy of the mechanics involved. Imagine designing a system that can distinguish between footsteps and tectonic vibrations, without electricity, without digital sensors, using only bronze, wood, and precision engineering. That's the level of craftsmanship we're talking about. In a time when many civilizations saw earthquakes as divine wrath, China, thanks to Zhang Heng, saw them as physical events that could be studied and understood. His seismograph was not just a tool. It was a declaration. Nature could be measured, predicted, and possibly tamed. Next time you hear about earthquake monitoring systems saving lives, think of Zhang Heng. Think of dragons and toads and the ancient machine that rattled open the door to modern science. Now let's sit back and relax and imagine ourselves shrouded in the unmistakable gentle touch of silk. Soft, shimmering, and strong, this seemingly delicate thread was once more valuable than gold. In fact, it helped weave together one of the most extensive and influential trade networks the world has ever known, the Silk Road. But behind this luxurious fabric lies a remarkable story of innovation, secrecy, and empire. Ancient China didn't just produce silk, it protected it, weaponized it, and built a global economy around it. According to legend, silk was discovered nearly 4,700 years ago by Empress Leizu, wife of the Yellow Emperor. As the story goes, she was sipping tea in her garden when a cocoon fell into her cup. As she fished it out, she noticed the cocoon unraveling into a long, glossy thread. Intrigued, she pulled the fiber and realized it could be woven into fabric. And so it goes. The art of silk farming was born. Whether the tale is myth or truth, what's undeniable is the sophistication of the silk production process developed in ancient China. It all begins with the silkworm, specifically the species Bombyx mori. These caterpillars feed exclusively on mulberry leaves and spin cocoons made of a single thread that can stretch over 3,000 feet long. The key was understanding how to cultivate these worms and harvest their threads without breaking them. The process, known as sericulture, was both delicate and labor-intensive. First, mulberry trees had to be grown and maintained to feed the worms. Next, silkworms were raised in controlled environments to ensure optimal growth. Once they began spinning their cocoons, workers would carefully harvest them before the moths emerged, as the act of breaking out would cut the thread. The cocoons were then soaked in hot water to soften the sericin, the protein that binds the threads together, and gently unraveled. Once spun into threads, silk could be dyed and woven into garments of breathtaking beauty and complexity. The result was fabric that was not only light and breathable, but also exceptionally durable and versatile. Silk quickly became a symbol of status and refinement, worn by royalty and nobility and used in rituals, art, and diplomacy. The Chinese quickly realized they had something precious on their hands. Much like each of the previous inventions we have discussed, for centuries, they kept the secrets of silk production under the tightest security. Revealing the methods of sericulture was punishable by death. The knowledge of how to raise silkworms and weave silk was considered a state secret, one of the most carefully guarded in history. This monopoly allowed China to dominate the silk trade for over 1,000 years. As demand for silk spread across Central Asia, the Middle East, and eventually Europe, trade routes began to form. These routes, collectively known as the Silk Road, became a sprawling network of interconnected paths stretching from Xi'an in China all the way to the Mediterranean. Along with silk, these roads carried spices, jewels, precious metals, philosophies, religions, and even diseases. Silk became more than a commodity. It became a currency, a diplomatic gift, and a political tool. Chinese emperors would offer bolts of silk to allies and tributary states. Soldiers were sometimes paid in silk, and foreign leaders often saw silk as a symbol of China's wealth and sophistication. Archaeological evidence shows that by the 1st century CE, silk garments had reached as far as Rome. Roman elites adored Chinese silk, even though they didn't understand how it was made. Roman writers described silk as woven air and lamented how much Roman gold was being spent on Eastern luxuries. Yet they could not reproduce it, and that mystery only enhanced silk's allure. The cloak and dagger secrecy surrounding silk's production remained intact for centuries. According to legend, it wasn't until the 6th century CE that the secret was smuggled out of China. The story goes that 2 Nestorian monks, sent by Byzantine Emperor Justinian, managed to sneak silkworm eggs hidden in hollowed-out walking sticks back to Constantinople. From there, sericulture slowly spread to other parts of Asia and Europe. Even so, Chinese silk remained unmatched in quality and prestige for a long time. Different regions in China developed unique weaving techniques and patterns, contributing to a rich diversity in silk artistry. During the Tang and Song dynasties, silk garments became more elaborate, featuring complex embroidery, vibrant dyes, and metallic threads. They weren't just clothes, they were statements of culture, identity, and political rank. Silk production also spurred technological innovations. Advances in loom design, dyeing techniques, and textile management all arose from the demand to perfect the craft. These developments weren't limited to fashion. They influenced economics, manufacturing, and even social structures. particularly in cities where silk was a major industry. Today, silk continues to symbolize luxury, but it's also a reminder of how a single innovation can transform civilizations. The silken threads spun in ancient Chinese gardens stretched across continents, connecting cultures and economies in ways never before seen. And it all started with a curious empress, a cup of tea, and a cocoon. Another surprisingly key invention of ancient China is that of porcelain. Delicate, luminous, and nearly indestructible, was once the stuff of legend in the West. So synonymous with Chinese craftsmanship was this prized material that it simply became known as China. But far from being just pretty plates, porcelain was one of ancient China's most remarkable inventions, blending artistry, chemistry, and innovation. It transformed global trade and stood as a symbol of refinement, technology, and cultural prestige for over 1,000 years. The story of porcelain begins during the Han Dynasty, 206 BCE to 220 CE, though its roots lie even earlier in high-fired ceramic traditions. The earliest forms of proto-porcelain were discovered in southern China and gradually refined over centuries. True porcelain, translucent, hard and high-fired, was perfected during the Tang Dynasty, with full mastery achieved during the Song Dynasty. So what makes porcelain different from ordinary ceramics? It's all about the materials and firing process. True porcelain is made from a precise combination of kaolin clay and pétunce, a feldspathic rock. This mixture, when fired at extremely high temperatures, between 1,200 degrees Celsius and 1,400 degrees Celsius, undergoes a process called vitrification. The result is a non-porous, glass-like surface that is both incredibly strong and elegantly delicate. The Song Dynasty, in particular, marked a golden age for porcelain. Chinese artisans created wares that were not only functional, but also minimalist masterpieces, known for their subtle glazes, like the celadon of Longquan and the creamy white dingware. Song porcelains emphasized elegance, simplicity, and natural beauty. These objects were not just dishes or vases. They were meditative, almost philosophical in design. Under the Yuan and Ming dynasties, porcelain became more colorful and ornate, particularly with the development of blue and white ware. Cobalt blue pigments, imported from Persia, were applied beneath the glaze before firing. These bold patterns, featuring dragons, phoenixes, flowers, and landscapes, captivated both domestic and international markets. During the Ming Dynasty, 1368 to 1644, the city of Jingdezhen emerged as the porcelain capital of the world. Its location, rich in kaolin and nestled near fuel and water supplies, made it the perfect hub for porcelain production. Factories in Jingdezhen operated like well-oiled machines, with specialized artisans for each step: clay preparation, molding, painting, glazing, and firing. The result was stunning porcelain in vast quantities, exported as diplomatic gifts and luxury goods. Europe, in particular, became obsessed. By the 16th century, traders from Portugal and later the Dutch East India Company were shipping Chinese porcelain back to Europe in massive quantities. It adorned the tables and shelves of the elite, becoming a status symbol for royalty, aristocrats, and wealthy merchants. No European craftsman could replicate it, not for lack of trying. The precise recipe and firing techniques remained a closely guarded secret in China. This porcelain envy led to centuries of experimentation in Europe. It wasn't until the early 18th century that a young German alchemist, under the patronage of Augustus the Strong of Saxony, finally cracked the code. The result was Meissen porcelain, Europe's first successful imitation. But by then, Chinese porcelain had already shaped global tastes and aesthetics. Porcelain's global influence extended beyond beauty and dining. It helped establish long-distance maritime trade networks, influenced cross-cultural artistic exchanges, and even affected geopolitical dynamics. European demand for porcelain contributed to the balance of trade in China's favor, prompting Western powers to seek silver and later opium as exchange mechanisms, a move that would have dire consequences centuries later. But let's not forget the cultural impact within China itself. Porcelain was more than exportware. It was central to daily life and ritual, used in everything from ancestor worship and tea ceremonies to imperial court displays. Its visual vocabulary, symbolic motifs like lotus flowers, bats, symbols of fortune, and clouds, carried deep cultural meanings. Porcelain kilns were innovation hubs, constantly refining glazes, techniques, and styles. Junware, with its unpredictable color patterns from reduction firing. Ruware, famed for its crackled celadon glaze. And famille rose enamels of the Qing era all reflect the endless creativity of Chinese potters. Today, ancient Chinese porcelain is housed in museums across the globe. Auctions see pieces fetch millions of dollars. And yet, its real value isn't just monetary. It's the legacy of artistic ingenuity, technological mastery, and cultural diplomacy. Next time you see a porcelain cup, take a closer look. It's not just a vessel. It's a window into a world where fire and earth came together to make something timeless. And it all started with the kilns and vision of ancient China. We often take time for granted, checking our watches, phones, or clocks without much thought. But how did people know the time 1,000 years ago? In the West, the mechanical clock didn't make its debut until the 14th century. Yet in ancient China, one man had already imagined and built something extraordinary. A towering, intricate, water-driven astronomical clock that not only kept time, but also charted the heavens. His name was Su Song, and his invention was centuries ahead of its time. In 1092, during the Northern Song dynasty, Su Song, a polymath who was both a statesman and a scientist, unveiled his magnum opus, a 12-meter-tall clock tower that combined engineering, astronomy, and artistry into a single groundbreaking machine. This astronomical clock tower wasn't just a timekeeping device. It was a full-blown mechanical marvel, designed to track celestial movements and display time with stunning precision. The core mechanism of Su Song's clock was a water-powered escapement, a device that regulated the release of energy to drive the clock's movement in evenly spaced increments. This was centuries before European clockmakers would develop similar escapements. Su Song's design used a water wheel connected to gears and shafts that turned armillary spheres, rotating star maps, and even mechanical figurines that rang bells and marked the passage of time. What set this invention apart wasn't just the complexity, but the ambition. It combined hydraulics, mechanical engineering, and astronomical observation in a single system. Armillary spheres mimicked the motion of the stars and planets. Rotating celestial globes charted the sky's shifting constellations, and wooden figures emerged from windows to strike bells and announce the hours, a precursor to the cuckoo clocks and automata of later centuries. Su Song's inspiration came from earlier Chinese innovations. Water clocks had been used in China since at least the Han Dynasty. These devices measured time through the flow of water into calibrated containers. But Su Song went further. transforming this principle into a self-regulating automated system. He wanted to go beyond measuring time. He wanted to model the cosmos itself. The construction of this astronomical clock required not just vision, but incredible craftsmanship. Each gear had to be hand-carved, perfectly aligned, and precisely balanced. Susong even included diagrams and detailed instructions in his treatise, the Xin Yi Xiangfa Yao, new design for an armillary sphere and celestial globe, laying the foundation for future generations of engineers. Unfortunately, when the Song capital of Kaifeng was captured by the Jurchen in the early 12th century, the clock tower was dismantled and transported north. It was never fully rebuilt, and the detailed workings of Susong's masterpiece faded into history. But enough records survived to reconstruct its genius, and modern engineers and horologists have since verified that such a machine could, indeed, have functioned as described. This remarkable invention highlights a broader truth. Ancient Chinese scholars didn't just observe the world. They sought to replicate its rhythms mechanically. Their clocks didn't merely tell time. They embodied harmony with the universe. The idea that human inventions should reflect celestial order was deeply rooted in Confucian and Taoist philosophy. And Susong wasn't alone. Other inventors throughout Chinese history also contributed to timekeeping. Yi Xing, a monk and astronomer during the Tang Dynasty, built an earlier water-driven celestial sphere in the 8th century. Zhang Heng, of seismograph fame, contributed to early timekeeping concepts as well. Each innovation built upon the last, forming a lineage of curiosity and precision. But Susong's clock stands out because it foreshadowed the age of automation. It was, in essence, an early computer, a machine that ran according to pre-designed logic, powered by nature itself. It hinted at a future where machines could do more than assist. They could think in gears and ratios. Clocks in China weren't limited to grand towers either. Portable timekeeping devices, sundials, and incense clocks, where the scent marked the passage of time, were also widely used. These varied forms served different classes and purposes, from imperial courts to Buddhist temples to rural households. As trade expanded, these timekeeping ideas made their way westward. Islamic scholars translated and adapted Chinese works, and eventually European engineers encountered these concepts, inspiring developments that led to the mechanical clocks of the Renaissance. So next time you glance at your smartwatch or wall clock, take a moment to remember Susong's tower. Picture a city square in medieval Kaifeng, where a crowd watches wooden men strike bells, where a sphere of stars rotates overhead, where time is not just measured, but celebrated. In that moment, you're not just checking the time. You're participating in a tradition of innovation that began over 1,000 years ago, with water, with stars, and with one man's vision. The final invention we will look at tonight is that of paper currency. It is so ingrained in daily life that we rarely question its origin. We exchange bills, tap cards, and make digital transfers, all founded on the idea of symbolic money. But centuries ago, ancient China pioneered this revolutionary leap, moving from cumbersome metal coins to lightweight, portable paper money. This bold shift didn't just transform commerce in China. It laid the groundwork for modern financial systems across the world. The story begins in the Tang Dynasty, 618 to 907 CE, a period marked by flourishing trade, urban expansion, and economic sophistication. As markets grew and merchants began traveling greater distances, carrying large quantities of heavy copper coins became increasingly impractical. Wealthy traders, especially those operating along the Silk Road, needed a safer and more efficient means of managing their transactions. In response, Chinese merchants began using promissory notes called jiaozi during the late Tang and early Song dynasties. These handwritten slips served as a kind of "I owe you," issued by trusted merchants or financial institutions. While not government-issued currency, they marked a shift in public trust. People were willing to accept pieces of paper as representations of real wealth. Recognizing the system's utility, the Song dynasty government took a bold step. It began printing official paper money in the early 11th century. These were the world's first government-issued paper currency. Produced under strict control by the state, these notes were backed by reserves of metal coinage and circulated alongside coins to facilitate trade and taxation. The advantages were numerous. Paper money was lightweight, making it easier for merchants to travel and trade. It allowed the central government to regulate the money supply more precisely, enabling broader economic planning and state building. And by controlling the issuance and authenticity of paper notes, the government could assert greater authority over financial matters, essential in managing a rapidly growing empire. Printing the currency involved advanced techniques developed in China, including woodblock and later movable type printing. Anti-counterfeiting measures were also introduced. Special inks, seals, watermarks, and complex patterns helped verify authenticity. Some notes even included stern warnings. Counterfeiters would face the death penalty. Yet, as with many financial innovations, success brought challenges. The Song government eventually overissued paper money to fund military campaigns and infrastructure projects. Inflation surged. Trust in the currency eroded. These early economic pitfalls mirror the very problems faced by modern governments today. The delicate balance between monetary supply and stability. Despite these setbacks, the concept of paper currency endured. Later dynasties, including the Yuan under Kublai Khan and Ming, continued to refine and regulate paper money systems. Marco Polo famously wrote about China's use of paper money in the 13th century, marveling at how a great empire functioned with currency made not of gold or silver, but of mulberry bark. He described its widespread acceptance and state-enforced legitimacy, an early observation of fiat currency at work. Interestingly, the paper used wasn't ordinary writing paper. It was made from mulberry bark and other plant fibers, designed to be tough, long-lasting, and difficult to forge. These early notes came in various denominations and often bore intricate artwork, official seals, and imperial endorsements. They weren't just instruments of trade. They were tools of statecraft and symbols of imperial power. Paper currency also impacted taxation. Instead of collecting bulky grain or coin taxes, the state could now manage revenue more efficiently with printed notes. This enabled better resource allocation, military provisioning, and even disaster relief. The bureaucracy expanded to include currency offices and inspectors, signaling the rising complexity of state-managed economies. The innovation didn't stop at money. The economic concepts introduced alongside paper currency, credit, inflation control, standardized valuation, echo across centuries and continents. Modern financial institutions rely on these very principles. Today's banknotes, bonds, and even digital assets all trace conceptual ancestry to this bold Chinese experiment in trust and value. And while China eventually faced challenges with paper money, hyperinflation during the late Yuan and early Ming periods, for example, the idea had already taken root. Centuries later, European nations began issuing paper money of their own. The Bank of Sweden introduced banknotes in the 17th century, followed by England and France. But they were following a trail blazed by Chinese economists and bureaucrats 1,000 years earlier. Paper money wasn't just about ease, it was about imagination. To accept that a piece of paper had value required collective belief and systemic trust. Ancient China made that leap when no one else dared. They envisioned a financial future where value wasn't bound by weight or metal, but by consensus and credibility. So next time you reach into your wallet or tap your card at a store, remember that it all began with mulberry bark, ink, and a powerful idea. The future of money was born not in a modern bank, but in the busy markets and imperial offices of Song Dynasty China. From the hush of silk threads unraveling in a teacup to the thunderous boom of the first explosive powder, ancient China's contributions to human civilization are as vast as they are profound. The ingenuity displayed by Chinese inventors, philosophers, artisans, and statesmen wasn't just about solving practical problems. It was about fundamentally transforming the way humans live, connect, fight, trade, and think. Paper, for instance, revolutionized the transmission of knowledge. Without it, books, bureaucracy, literature, and mass education as we know them might never have emerged. Gunpowder didn't just change warfare, it redefined geopolitics. The compass guided ships across oceans, paving the way for global exploration and cultural exchange. Printing gave rise to mass communication centuries before the West caught up. The Great Wall demonstrated not only architectural genius, but the power of centralized coordination and long-term vision. The seismograph, with its mythic dragons and toads, showed an early understanding of the natural world as something measurable. Silk fueled economies and linked empires across continents. Porcelain dazzled with its beauty and strength. Clocks brought order to time itself, and paper currency introduced the idea that trust, not weight, can be the foundation of an economy. These weren't isolated achievements. They were part of a grand continuum, a culture that valued observation, innovation, harmony, and purpose. Ancient China's advances weren't just ahead of their time, they shaped time itself. As we scroll through digital devices, transfer money with a tap, navigate via GPS, or read on paper-thin screens, we're living in a world built on these ancient breakthroughs. They remind us that the past isn't dead. It's embedded in every part of our modern lives. The next time you sip from a porcelain cup, open a book, look at a clock, or marvel at fireworks, think of the brilliant minds of ancient China, not as distant historical figures, but as architects of the present. Their legacy is not just in museums or textbooks, it's in our pockets, on our walls, and in our daily routines. History isn't just something that happened, it's something we live every day, and few civilizations have shaped that daily experience as deeply or as enduringly as ancient China. Thank you for coming on this journey with me tonight. I truly hope you go on to have a wonderful night's sleep and restful dreams. If you enjoyed this story, I'd appreciate it if you could like, subscribe, and maybe even comment on other places you would like to visit, and I'll try and make it happen. But for now, settle down, relax, close your eyes, and drift off. May sound sleep and beautiful dreams come to you tonight. You deserve it.